You know, usually when you talk about buying a new vehicle, there's this expectation of excitement.
Oh, yeah. The new car smell, right?
Exactly. The flawless paint under the showroom lights, the thrill of the test drive. I mean, it's supposed to be this milestone moment for you.
It's deeply ingrained in the culture. Like, getting a new set of keys has always been a major marker of personal progress.
But, well, if you step into the auto industry in this current market, that excitement is hitting a massive reality check. Welcome to Auto News Talk. We're looking at an environment where affordability is just the ultimate speed bump.
Right, and automakers are frantically rewriting their playbooks just to keep you, the buyer, in the driver's seat.
Yeah, the rules of the game are just shifting constantly. And on Auto News Talk, we are exploring how the industry is adapting to this profound shock to the system.
Because traditional strategies are failing left and right.
They really are. We're talking about unexpected boxy hybrid revivals, radically cheap modular electric vehicles, and dealerships finding entirely new ways to finance the squeezed middle class.
If we look at the terrain we're walking through, it really is, a tale of a divided market. On the surface, overall vehicle demand looks surprisingly stable.
Sure, you still see plenty of new cars on the road.
Exactly. But if you peer underneath that glossy surface, there is this massive shift happening in what people are actually buying and perhaps more importantly, how they're scraping the money together to pay for it.
So we are going to trace that ripple effect for you. It starts with a surprising shakeup at the very top of the automaker rivalries, looking at the giants of the industry, and we'll follow that thread all the way down to the harsh reality of the dealership finance desk.
It's quite the journey.
It is. So let's unpack this macro view first. Because despite all the economic headwinds we constantly hear about, the sheer volume of vehicles moving off lots is just staggering.
It's a fascinating dynamic, honestly. A forward-looking forecast from Cox Automotive highlights that the U.S. new vehicle market is remaining incredibly resilient.
Even with high interest rates.
Yeah, even with very high borrowing costs and inflation putting pressure on wallets. They project the market to hold near a seasonally adjusted annual rate, or SAR, of 16.1 million vehicles.
Wow. Okay, so for anyone not living and breathing industry metrics, a SAR of 16.1 million basically means if you took the current monthly sales pace and stretched it over a whole year, factoring out seasonal bumps, that's the massive volume being sold, right?
Precisely. And to break that down further, their full forecast anticipates 15.8 million vehicles overall for the reporting period, with retail sales projected at 12.9 million and fleet sales like rental car companies and corporate buyers expected to total about 2.9 million vehicles.
Which, I mean, feels completely counterintuitive. You hear about affordability challenges constantly. My immediate thought is that sales should be plummeting. What is actually keeping that engine running?
Well, the Cox report points to a very specific demographic keeping the lights on. It's strong equity markets and accumulated household wealth.
So the buyers who already have money are just continuing to spend it.
Exactly. That upper tier of the economy is currently propping up the demand. There's a memorable detail from their data that illustrates this perfectly, actually.
What's that?
While sales are tracking slightly below the stronger pace of the previous tracking period, the monthly rate has actually stabilized.
So we're looking at a steady market, just not an accelerating one. The people with means are buying. But affordability is capping any real growth because, well, the middle class is largely sitting on the sidelines.
That is the exact implication. The market has found a ceiling based purely on who can afford to participate.
Right.
However, what this forecast doesn't answer is how fragile this stability really is.
Because things can change fast.
Oh, absolutely. The data explicitly assumes there are no major policy shocks on the horizon. If borrowing costs spike further or employment falters, that steady 16.1 million rate could fracture overnight.
Yeah, the pie is relatively stable in size right now, but who is getting the biggest slice of that pie is where this narrative takes a sharp turn.
It really does.
There's a massive shakeup happening at the top, driven entirely by the powertrain choices consumers are making.
The powertrain pivot is completely redefining automotive leadership. Another piece of analysis from Cox Automotive reveals that Toyota is rapidly closing the sales gap with General Motors.
And the driving force behind this is that consumer demand for hybrids is just drastically outpacing pure electric vehicle adoption.
Exactly. Let me put the numbers from that report on the table because they paint a stark picture. EV sales are projected to plummet by 23.3%, while hybrid sales are jumping about 10%.
Wow. And GM leaned heavily into a pure EV strategy, right?
They did, and as a result, they're seeing a projected 7.2% sales drop across their brands.
Ouch.
Meanwhile, Toyota, which notoriously held back on pure EVs to heavily invest in a broad lineup of hybrids, is seeing a 1% gain in a market that's overall shrinking slightly.
That's crazy. And the margin between these two competitors is razor thin right now, isn't it?
Oh, incredibly thin. The gap between them has shrunk to roughly 83,255 vehicles.
Wait, just over 83,000 cars?
Yeah, that is the narrowest margin at this stage of a tracking cycle since the pandemic era. Supply chain disruptions completely upended inventory.
That is practically a rounding error for companies operating at this scale. I mean, it's like GM bet the whole casino on a single roulette number with pure EVs, while Toyota has been quietly playing blackjack with hybrids, just making safer bets and steadily raking in the chips.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the broader implication is that automakers who went all in on electric vehicles, assuming the consumer was ready for a total transition, well, they're losing serious ground to the legacy brands who maintained broad, accessible hybrid options.
But let me challenge the permanence of that trend for a second. Is this hybrid surge a permanent consumer shift? Or is it just, a psychological safety net, like a temporary stepping stone, until the EV charging infrastructure actually gets built out to a point where people trust it?
That is the exact debate happening in boardrooms everywhere. What this data doesn't answer is whether incoming factors like a wave of newer, cheaper EV model launches or aggressive manufacturer incentives will reverse this trend for GM.
Right.
But if we look at the psychology, until a buyer feels 100% confident they won't get stranded trying to find a working charger on a family road trip, the hybrid engine offers a bridge.
Yeah, the consumer is speaking very clearly with their wallet, choosing flexibility over absolute zero emission.
Exactly. Which forces automakers to figure out how to capture that specific momentum.
Right. If hybrids are the winning hand, you have to find the perfect package to wrap around that engine. And one automaker seems to be doing that by tapping into early 2000s nostalgia.
We are seeing a fascinating intersection of nostalgia and pragmatism here. There's a detailed report circulating that Honda is preparing to revive a cult classic vehicle, the Honda Element.
Oh, wow. The ultimate rolling toaster.
That's the one.
I remember people either fiercely loved the Element for its sheer practicality, with those hose-out rubber floors, or they just hated the boxy look.
And that polarizing utilitarian nature is exactly what makes it valuable again. The report notes Honda is bringing it back specifically as a hybrid to capture the utility and light off-road market.
Okay, so where does it fit in their current lineup?
It's slated to slot right between their HR-V and the CR-V.
Okay, from a sizing perspective, that makes total sense. But the success of this hinges on the price tag. We just established that affordability is the major roadblock. Where does this fit into a squeezed consumer's budget?
The rumored pricing aims for a mid-$30,000 range. The strategy here is very deliberate. It's built to directly compete with utility-focused, slightly rugged SUVs like the Ford Bronco Sport.
Ah, going after that weekend warrior market.
Exactly. And the memorable detail from this report is the sheer confidence in the production target. They are aiming for roughly 100,000 units in its first full year for this boxy revival.
100,000 units. That is a serious commitment to this concept.
It is. The implication is that automakers realize a hybrid engine alone isn't enough to excite a buyer. They are actively blending these proven, beloved nostalgic form factors with the highly demanded hybrid powertrain to hit the absolute sweet spot of consumer desire.
Right, so you get the rugged, retro boxy look for your weekend camping trips, but you also get the fuel efficiency for your daily commute.
It's a brilliant emotional play, but there's a significant limitation to this information.
What's that?
Because Honda has not officially confirmed this plan on the record, the open question is whether the final specifications, the price point, and the actual design will match this rumored blueprint when it finally hits the assembly line. Corporate priorities can shift rapidly.
That's true. I'm also curious if leaning on nostalgia is really enough to guarantee 100,000 sales, or if they are just trying to draft off the recent success of vehicles like the Bronco Sport, hoping the hybrid engine acts as the ultimate differentiator.
Well, given the current consumer appetite for both utility and fuel efficiency, it's a highly calculated gamble that addresses both desires simultaneously.
So hybrids are seemingly dominating that mid-$30,000 range. But what about EVs? We just discussed GM struggles, showing that pure electric vehicles are hitting a wall, and the biggest reason for that wall is the massive sticker price.
Right.
How can an electric vehicle actually win on affordability without bankrupting the manufacturer building it?
To achieve that, you have to completely tear down and rethink how a vehicle is manufactured. According to a deep dive into a startup called Slate, that extreme cost-cutting is their entire business model.
Okay.
Slate is attacking the affordability crisis with a radically stripped-down modular electric pickup truck.
When you say radically stripped down, what does that actually look like for the consumer? And more importantly, what does it cost?
The base price they have confirmed is $24,950 before destination fees.
Wait, really? Under 25 grand for a brand new electric pickup?
Yeah.
In a market where the average new car is approaching $50,000, that is practically unheard of. How do they physically manufacture a truck for that little?
The technical specs are heavily compromised to hit that number, but in a very strategic way. It features a 205-mile range using a 63 kilowatt-hour lithium iron phosphate battery.
Ah, okay. I know lithium iron phosphate, often called LFP, is a term thrown around a lot in EV spaces. Why does that specific chemistry matter for the price?
Well, traditional EV batteries rely on minerals like nickel and cobalt, which are incredibly expensive and prone to supply chain bottlenecks.
Yep.
By switching to an LFP battery, Slate sacrifices a bit of energy density, meaning slightly less range, but they drastically slash the manufacturing cost. That is the core of how they hit that price point. At launch, the truck offers 181 horsepower with rear-wheel drive only.
So it isn't going to win any drag races or tow a massive yacht, but that clearly isn't the intended demographic anyway.
Not at all. And here is where it gets incredibly innovative. They're selling a basic platform. Buyers can actually purchase physical conversion kits to turn that base pickup truck into an SUV for an extra $5,000 or a fastback version for about $7,000 more.
It sounds like the IKEA model of car buying. You start with a cheap, identical base platform, and you literally build out your own SUV or fastback by bolting on parts.
It is the ultimate modular approach. And to keep the manufacturing costs at absolute rock bottom, the article notes a fascinating detail about their assembly line.
Which is?
Every single truck will leave the factory in the exact same paint color.
Oh, wow. The Henry Ford approach. Any color you want, as long as it's the one we decided to paint it.
Exactly. Paint shops and automotive factories are notoriously expensive. They require massive amounts of capital, space, and environmental controls.
Makes sense.
By skipping a multicolor paint shop entirely, they save millions. If a buyer wants exterior customization, it is handled entirely by vinyl wraps applied at the very end of the production line, starting at just $499.
That is a brilliant workaround to a massive legacy cost. The implication here is that Slate is attempting to redefine how vehicles are built and sold by stripping away standard equipment, removing manufacturing complexities, and pushing customization to the aftermarket.
Right.
They're doing everything possible to make EVs genuinely accessible to the masses. But does stripping a truck down this much alienate traditional truck buyers? You know, the people who expect heavy-duty, out-of-the-box utility and four-wheel drive?
Oh, they are definitely alienating the traditional heavy-duty buyer. But they are targeting the price-sensitive buyer who wants the utility of a truck bed for weekend hardware store runs, but is entirely priced out of a $60,000 luxury electric truck.
Yeah, that's a huge market.
However, the open question the article highlights is the reality of their demand. While Slate boasts 180,000 reservations, it remains completely unclear how many of those low-cost placeholders will actually convert into firm, paid orders when the vehicles are finally ready to deliver.
Right, talk is cheap, so Slate gets the sticker price down to $25,000. But even with a cheaper price tag, the buyer still has to get approved for the loan. And if you sit down in a dealership finance office in this market, that is exactly where these deals are dying.
The dealership finance office is where the rubber meets the road. An insightful piece from Digital Dealer focuses on how financing friction is heavily stalling middle-income buyers, regardless of the vehicle's sticker price.
Picture yourself sitting across from the finance manager. You have a willing buyer, a willing seller, but what is actually causing the friction in that room?
We're seeing a widening split in the market that mirrors the Cox Automotive data we discussed earlier. High-income buyers are generally fine. They can absorb higher interest rates or simply pay cash.
Sure.
But moderate-income buyers are hitting a massive wall in the F&I, the finance and insurance office. Traditional lenders, like the big national banks, are heavily tightening their underwriting standards. They're retreating to safety, focusing their approvals almost exclusively on prime and super prime borrowers with flawless credit histories.
So if your credit score has even a slight blemish, the traditional banks are just walking away from the table.
And the numbers behind this financial burden are staggering. The article cites Experian data showing the average monthly payment for a new vehicle has skyrocketed to about $767.
$767 a month? Wow. If you consider the median household income, carving out nearly $800 a month just for the car payment before you even pay for insurance, gas, and maintenance that fundamentally alters a family's budget, it's a massive burden.
It really is. Yet, despite that burden, people still need transportation. The same source points to Equifax data showing that over 40% of auto loans still go to consumers earning less than $100,000 a year.
So the middle class is still desperately trying to buy vehicles. They are just getting squeezed incredibly hard by these astronomical payments and the strict bank approvals. It's like the automakers are building a bridge with these cheaper modular models and hybrids, but the traditional banks are pulling up the toll booth right as the middle class tries to cross.
That's a great way to look at it. And because those traditional banks are pulling up the toll booth, dealerships are having to find a detour. The article highlights that credit unions are stepping in to fill this massive void.
Why are credit unions more willing to take on these loans than the big banks?
It comes down to their fundamental approach to lending. Credit unions typically use a relationship-based lending model. Rather than just relying on a rigid, automated credit score cutoff dictated by an algorithm, they look at the entire picture.
Like what?
They look at job stability, long-term employment history, and whether the person is an active member of their local community.
They treat the borrower like a human being with a context, rather than just a 3-digit number on a screen.
Exactly. And the implication for dealerships is profound. The digital dealer piece argues that dealerships absolutely must diversify their lender portfolios and heavily integrate these credit unions into their daily workflow.
Because otherwise they just lose the sale.
Right. If a dealership only relies on the big traditional banks, they are going to lose countless sales that could otherwise be saved by a credit union willing to look at the nuances of a middle-income borrower.
But if a dealership pivots heavily away from prime lenders to push these middle-income approvals through credit unions, are they exposing themselves to a sudden cliff drop if the economy tightens even slightly?
That is the precarious tightrope walk. The limitation of this strategy, the open question the article leaves us with, is how dealerships can perfectly balance this risk. Indirect lending networks can connect dealers to credit unions very easily through their software. But how do dealers balance the necessity of taking on marginal deals to hit their sales targets without overexposing themselves or their lending partners to a wave of defaults?
It requires incredible precision.
It really does.
Let's take a step back and pull all these threads together.
Right.
When you look at the macro data, the vehicle designs, and the financial hurdles, a very clear picture of the industry starts to emerge.
If we synthesize all of this, 3 massive themes dominate the landscape. First, affordability is the central gravity of the entire industry. That overarching market stability that Cox Automotive reported completely masks the desperate need for middle-class financial solutions that the digital dealer piece exposed.
Right. The raw demand for vehicles is there, but the capital to acquire them is heavily restricted. The volume of cars moving off the lot is high, but it is getting harder and harder for the average household to be one of those buyers.
Exactly. The second theme is the powertrain pivot. Automakers cannot simply dictate what the consumer will adopt. Consumer demand is heavily favoring the practicality, psychological safety, and lower upfront cost of hybrids.
Which is clearly evidenced by Toyota's massive sales surge past GM and the Cox data.
And Honda's reported willingness to revive the Element specifically as a hybrid.
Yeah, the market is demanding a bridge, not a sudden leap to pure electric. And when companies do try to make that leap, they run into the third theme.
Radical cost cutting. To save the EV dream and make it financially viable for the masses, companies are resorting to extreme, out-of-the-box manufacturing measures. Slate's modular, single-paint color, wrap-customized truck is the prime example of stripping away decades of legacy manufacturing costs just to hit a sticker price the middle class can actually digest.
But across all these themes, there are some glaring contradictions pulling the industry in opposite directions.
There are 2 major tensions at play here. First, you have automaker ambition actively colliding with consumer preference. GM's heavy, multi-billion-dollar focus on an all-electric future directly contrasts with the consumer's overwhelming, immediate demand for Toyota's hybrids.
The corporate vision simply isn't matching the reality of what buyers want on the lot.
No, it's not. And the second tension happens in the finance office. Resilient demand versus rigid gatekeeping.
How so?
Well, the Cox forecast proves that vehicle demand hasn't disappeared. Millions of people want to buy cars. Yet the financing data from digital dealers shows that traditional lenders are actively locking those willing, employed, middle-class buyers out of the market by tightening their approval standards.
So what is the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener, trying to navigate or understand this automotive landscape?
The single practical takeaway is that to survive this divided market, business as usual is completely dead. Whether it means an automotive startup offering user-installable SUV conversion kits, a legacy manufacturing giant pivoting aggressively back to hybrid engines, or a local dealer bypassing traditional banks to build relationships with community credit unions. Aggressive adaptation is the only way forward.
Adaptation or obsolescence. The future of the auto industry isn't just about what is under the hood or how large the touchscreen is on the dashboard. It's about making sure the middle class can actually afford the keys.
Oh, absolutely.
Keep an eye on how these radically budget-focused EVs and nostalgic hybrid revivals actually translate from internet hype to physical driveways. Will the consumer bite, or will the financing wall remain too high to climb? Thanks for joining us on Auto News Talk.